I'm planning to write for this park. 2003, I went back to grad school here, and I thought I had some free time, and I joined the board of the nature park, which is now a Sombro. And I said, well, I'll survey the park for archaeology, and cover that for you guys. And I'm still working on the report for it, so I'm very delinquent. But all of which is to say that part of the report I want to make it sort of accessible to the K through 12 kids that can maybe learn from it, is that at least by 13,000 years ago in this hemisphere, fully modern humans. I almost say that as much for myself as for others, because growing up, I mean, you can see how old I am. I lived in small towns, public school. You get this notion that of these barriers of pre and post history, the old Lewis Henry Morgan scheme of savagery, barbarism, civilization, and it's hard to get through that and think of people as being fully modern, intellectually, culturally, spiritually, physically, same as us, basically, but living on the land for everything. So that's the first thing, I guess, and I want to give that to you all, I guess, because they were range scientists and ecologists too in their own way. They knew their land, they knew where to get food, or I should say they know their land, they know where to get food, they know how to live on it. They did so, they still do so, centuries, millennia. So thinking about all that, I have this notion, there's probably a name for it somewhere, that with our modern brains, no matter what our cultural background, we find ways to fill life with meaning. Our own art, drama especially is a big thing, I think, with us humans. Petty or real drama. Even without movies and books and internets, people had very elaborate cultural traditions. I'm sorry, I should have spit out my gum earlier, but I didn't find a trash can. I was talking to a mentor that a professor of mine I had in undergrad in the 80s and in grad school in the early 2000s, and stay friends with. He works a lot over at Mescalero. This is the one word I know, Inde people. He's a linguist, and I was asking him about the girls' ceremony that they do. He said there's 60 songs that go with that in a cycle, and they're timed to certain times of the day, the night, over the 4-day ceremony that they go through. That's how people keep track of things, I think. Remember how to live properly, to remember where things are, what to do when. It's in songs and stories, oral traditions, developing one's memory without writing, recording. They did it. And we used to be trained kind of that old game we used to play in school, they called telephone. Like I would whisper something to you, a sentence, and you would whisper it to Niall, and by the time it got around here, it's totally different. I don't think that happened. I think people really worked to transfer things verbatim. Anyway, so that's all that. That's the gist of what I wanted to get across is to, I know you guys, ecologists, range scientists, biologists, this landscape out here, the plant communities, just keep in mind that probably a lot of what we see here has some history with humanity over the last 10,000, 12,000 years. I was trying to think of concrete, hard science examples where we can demonstrate that, and the best I can come up with is sort of tangential, maybe. We go out here and we find fireplaces and dig into them sometimes, find the fuel wood and some of the plant remains that might have been cooked. There's one over here on that Arroyo Trail. It's exposed in a cut bank wall. It's 5,700 years old. I pulled charcoal out of it 2 times, 2 different times, sent it to a botanist. He identified it as mesquite wood. So they're using mesquite fuel wood 5,700 years ago. I can't find anything else there. So those folks, and that's a tough time. We don't have much to go on from that period. But, they're small groups of hunter-gatherers, best we can surmise, living on wild plants, game, and not leaving much behind. And that's really the theme for most of that timeline. Probably, 8,000 years of it. And then the most recent 300 or 400 years, which is kind of cool because that's those Inde people who are still here. They were hunter-gatherers, small groups, highly mobile, used huge tracts of land, knew where the food was, knew when it was, and they came after, if we look at this, what we call the ceramic period, Jornada Basin, 1400, there were pueblos here. There's a big pueblo up east of headquarters at Cottonwood Spring. There's several more known in the foothills of the San Andres to the north. There's more and more getting found down around White Sands Missile Range headquarters. Let me think, down there by Doñana Range Camp, a company dug about 12 rooms of an adobe pueblo a few years ago. Very interesting. They said it was probably only occupied about 10 years. But those folks were, looks like, intensive corn growers, probably also beans and squash, maybe even cotton. At the same time, the Fort Bliss folks have done a lot of archaeology to support the Army. They've gotten some 3,500 radiocarbon dates from archaeological features. The guy down there, Miles Miller, who's in the reference list I provided, has done a lot of work with that and looked at frequencies and peaks and valleys of dated things and the data, the materials that come with it. And it looks like at the same time that we're getting intensive agriculture in the 1300s, there's also a big push on wild foods, agave, sotol, cactus fruits, the succulents, wild seeds, the seeds we don't find very readily, but grass seeds, quinoams. People are using those, it seems like, as heavily as they're relying on agriculture. Going back a little further, earlier in the ceramic period, the dwelling types are not the pueblo, they're pit houses. They're semi-subterranean, dished out pits in the ground with a dome over them. Separate family dwellings, some communal areas in between. Those are really the ideal dwellings. I keep threatening to my wife that I want to live in one because I get sick of our clutter and all our plumbing maintenance and crap like that. So we just burn it down and build a new one. Why not? Those obtained through a couple thousand years of time and I want to say these clunky terms we have like archaic, it shouldn't really mean that, but people in that later period used pit houses too. They grew corn and they didn't have pottery at that time. So that's the pre-pottery time. That was kind of a definite mix of hunting and gathering, some agriculture in ideal places. I can't say we've really identified growing areas. We know there's villages around the playa edges and the alluvial fans up at the springs on the foothills of the San Andres. They're probably using the water from there. A survey project I did for the Jornada a few years ago, just off of Goldenberg Draw. This is kind of a classic case. What I do is I call it contract archaeology. I get called out if there's going to be an impact on the ground and there's federal land involved to check what's there before the impact occurs. So they were wanting to erect these the meteorology tower array, and Chris Hocutt, I think I worked with, who's out here somewhere later, but he said, we just need about 40 feet of a footprint. I said, well, I'll go look at them and I'll do a little more for buffer. And I got into one off of Goldenberg Draw, just north of Goldenberg Draw, in the Mesquite Dunes. And that site went on for 900 meters. And I just kept chasing it out and chasing it out. And it's just a series of hearth features and artifact clusters, pottery and chipstone and groundstone. I can only kind of guess that maybe they were working Goldenberg Draw somehow for its water. The time period based on the pottery is certainly there was agriculture going on, but not necessarily right there. Okay, earlier times, so 5,700 years ago, we're deep into the Archaic with our thing over here. A couple of sites up here north of the road have some points that look like they're pretty early. Even earlier, the divide we call Paleoindian, that ties into a point tradition stemming from the end of the Ice Age, starting with Clovis, then Folsom, and then they sort of diversify. These are very artfully made points, often on really fine chert and chalcedony, agate type material, sometimes obsidian. Very well executed and used apparently on large game, mammoth, bison, horses, camels, I suppose. You all probably heard about the footprints they're finding over on White Sands National Monument around the lake. I heard a paper a couple of years ago. They found human tracks and sloth tracks, and they were able to figure out it looked like the humans were actually tracking the sloth, and the sloth had been turning to see what was going on. I can't believe they're able to see this, but it was really, really interesting. Here, there's Folsom at Isaacs Lake. There's Folsom up at Prizer Hill area in the central Jornada Basin. There's Folsom and later over by Hatch and Placitas Arroyo area. There's some down in the gap between the Organs and the Franklins. So it's around quite a bit. What we don't have are chronometric dates or really good context when we find the diagnostic points and a little bit of debris. There's Clovis way up north at the north end of the basin at, they call it Mockingbird Gap. It's really up there just south of US 380, the highway between San Antonio and Carrizozo. Big draw there. They had a couple hundred Clovis points. That looks like a camp where they're arming up and resharpening and that sort of thing. Still, I don't know if they've gotten any chronometric dates. Southeastern Arizona and some of the big draws, they have kill sites, mammoth and bison. Water Canyon up west of Socorro, they might have a kill site, I can't remember for sure. Pre-Paleoindian is a possibility. Forgive my language, Pendejo Cave over there northeast of Oro Grande on Otero Mesa was dug by a pretty famous archaeologist from Harvard in the 80s. They claimed they had human artifacts and contexts as old as 35,000 years. If so, and there's a number of claims like that, and it hasn't been widely accepted as being reconsidered, reevaluated. You know what pack rats do to cave stratigraphy, and so they're really taking a hard look at that. If it was, it would be a game changer. But the peopling of this world, the old theory, and it still holds, I think, is that people crossed from Siberia when glaciers were up and the land was exposed between Alaska and Siberia. They called it Beringia. But there's also a lot of evidence that people probably came by boat along the coasts. A lot of the old sites are on the coast or on the islands. There's an accepted, very well documented 14,000-year-old site in southern Chile. So they're all over both continents pretty early. There's even a serious, sincere, I guess, hypothesis that this Clovis actually derived from a tradition in France called Solutrean. They're very similar technique of making their points. There's a kind of a couple thousand year gap there. This Dennis Stanford, who was at the Smithsonian, He studied it a lot. He proposed it. He said it would be possible for people to work their way by boat from ice floe to ice floe, maybe, during the ice ages, living on sea mammals, I guess. I don't know. We don't have any DNA. We don't have any skeletal remains to prove that. And it's a touchy subject because, of course, you know how things are these days. A lot of people seized on that and said, you know, see, white Europeans were here first. And I'm glad I can make you laugh. It's very interesting. It's cool to think about what it means. I mean, over the course of 14, 15, 20,000 years, people have ways of getting around, and they intermingle, and they work with each other, and they share things, and then it becomes, it's all American now. Native folks ask, where did you come from? I don't know anybody who says otherwise. Will say, we've been here since time immemorial. We came up from this land, and that deserves to be taken seriously too. Thanks for giving me back my notes. I know I followed the man talking about mesquite yesterday, and that was great, because mesquite's so important. It seems like probably, I'm just guessing, 75% of the fire features we dig in the desert, the fuel wood comes up as mesquite, or partly mesquite. And of course the beans are a tremendous food source to cows and to humans. Some of the tools and features we see are probably processing mesquite beans. And there's that old, this York and Dick Petty, 1969. I cite it in every report. They looked at the grassland to shrubland transition thing, where they looked at the 1850s and on land surveyor diaries, and these guys would go along every mile, and mark the corners or the half corners every mile or half mile, and make a little comment about the terrain and the plant life. And of course, a lot of it was good grama grass. That's what they'd say a lot of times. Now it's mesquite, creosote. So from that, they were able to model or sort of profile some of the changes in this recent historic period. They also commented a lot of those areas that were mesquite had Indian camps in them. So for us, it's kind of a chicken-egg question: are they seeing the Indian camps because the coppice dunes between them is all eroded down to where the cultural material is, or were the native people there using the mesquite's ancestors somehow? Maybe it's a stretch, but picking these areas because there was mesquite there, and there seems to still be now, or there is again, I don't know. I think that's it, really. What else? Any questions? I'm happy to answer. I'm sure I went on plenty long enough.